are the challenges of the DevOps organizations in following the traditional GRC practices? Because, you know, you have in one end policies, kind of rigid processes, and then you have in another end DevOps, a fast-pacing, moving environment.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge really when you get to governance, risk, and compliance is quite often it's a central team that's a long way removed from what's actually happening on the ground. They don't have any visibility to what engineers are facing on a day-to-day basis. So how can they set standards for what we do? And what happens is that they set these standards, but we don't follow them because we can't follow them because they're just so abstract in our own minds as engineers. And that can lead to problems where you gain inefficiencies in what you're doing because there's no standardization across the organization across what you're doing. And I think that's a challenge for the organizations in actually building that type of, I wouldn't want to call it resilience, but it's about creating that type of environment where we standardize to building that resilience. And that's just something we can't do. You cannot say, here's a standard, everybody follows it, and therefore we're resilient. That doesn't work. What we need is a bit more experimentation. But how does GRC then fit into that? Because GRC are saying, well, we've got to also tell our regulators that we're secure. So how do we do that? How do we tell our regulators that we're secure if we're running experiments and breaking things and testing things, injecting a little bit of fault here and there, which we'll be talking about later. So GRC does have its own challenges in those places, in those areas. Another thing which I just want to touch on something that was mentioned earlier. We've also got this idea of when we see faults in what we do. So for example, you run a scan and you see loads of, your build gets lots of little red like labels, and it comes back and it says, you've got a few bugs here, you've got a few defects, you've got a few vulnerabilities perhaps. We quite often say, oh yeah, that happens all the time. Well, what we're doing there is that we're normalizing deviance and we're not building resistance. We're actually creating fragility there. And that's another thing where standardization or standards don't help, because no matter how much standards or how much governance we apply to it, we do not build in resilience that way. So we do need another paradigm shift, and that's where I think we need to go.